Our next speaker is Professor Stephen Cooke from Carleton University. He's Professor of Applied Fish Ecology, and he's also the current editor of AFS's flagship magazine, journal, the Fisheries. Steve.
Okay, morning folks. Before we get into the science, I want to introduce myself a little bit more fulsomely than David did just there. We'll go there in the next few slides, but I do want you to have a quick peek at the title there. If you don't know what a maxim is, we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But I just want to emphasize the use of two important words there, responsible and sustainable. And again, I will come back to that in a moment. I'm not just using the word sustainable, which is oftentimes a word that we throw around in the science community. So about me, it all goes back to this fellow, a fishing celebrity in Canada, Bob Azumi. That is a pamphlet that my mom kept. It was a little poster that he signed, and that's in my box of treasures along with my baby shoes and other things. That's how I spent my Saturday morning. Some kids watch cartoons. For me, it was Bob Azumi. From there, obviously got addicted to fishing itself, and at the age of 15, I was the tournament director and conservation director for a local BASS chapter. At some point along the line, I connected with this fellow, Dave Phillip, ended up doing a PhD at the University of Illinois. I happened to go back to visit campus last year, and I went to my old office, and on the door is still a BASS sticker, despite the people in that office no longer studying fish. And the title of my dissertation was The Physiological Diversity of Syncharcid Fishes, so I was working on bass at that time. And now I'm a professor at Carleton University. I picked a winter picture to show you that I do actually live in Canada, but we do have summer, and I am a professor there, study applied fish ecology. I'm always proud to say that as a lab we own 2 bass boats, which I think gives you an idea of the kind of work that we do. But I'm also a parent, and so the picture that you can see where there's a child releasing a fish, that fish actually has a tag in its back, and that fish was tagged, an anchor tag. That fish was tagged by one of my kids. So actually involving my family in the research we do. So all of these things sort of come together in really fun and exciting and meaningful ways. All right, so back to the title, a maxim. What is a maxim? So it's a noun, it's a short, pithy statement expressing a general truth or fundamentally held principle. So sadly, a maxim is, we will all die. Another maxim is that the sun will set tonight. These are things that are just known to be, they're sort of facts that most people would agree with. There's always exceptions. And so what I'm going to do today is present what I consider to be maxims within this space. We all come from different perspectives, we all have different backgrounds, different lived experiences, different values, and that may help shape your perspective on the extent to which these maxims align with your worldview and perspective. That's fine. This is very much supposed to be a discussion starter. So I'm going to cover a lot of territory in the next 15, 20 minutes or so, and some things will resonate with you in a good way, some things may irritate you a little bit. That is the purpose, okay? Get the conversation going. I also want to just touch on this idea of responsible and sustainable. So that's the verbiage that's used by the UN FAO in every document they put together. And that's because the UN FAO isn't about making sure that we're protecting biodiversity for biodiversity's sake. It's also about feeding people and supporting livelihoods and so on. So the responsible side of fishing in my world is really the human dimension, the people, the anglers, the communities, the businesses that benefit from that. But responsibility also, I think, really helps to indicate that we as individuals, whether that be an individual manager, individual scientist, individual angler, can make a difference. It's really hard for me to sort of conceptualize how I'm going to go out and make that fishery more sustainable. but as a responsible angler that engages in responsible behaviors, that collectively can help to get us to that sustainable, to a sense of sustainability. So just in this, this graphic that we had put together, so we've got different actor groups at the top, we've got anglers, the industry and decision makers, and each one has different responsibilities, and they're collectively needed to achieve sustainable recreational fisheries. So with that, let's jump into the maximum, the maxims. Obviously, the first one here, I think everybody buys into, the idea that black bass have diverse socioeconomic and cultural value. I know we all like to think about bass as being the fish that we catch and release. They're the target of fishing tournaments and so on, and that is certainly the case, and much benefit comes from that. But there's also other uses. I love a good smallmouth bass fry a couple times a year. We have indigenous communities that have engaged with bass for food going back millennia, including faunal remains that have, for smallmouth bass that have been located in some of the territories of the Onondaga Iroquois. We have small-scale commercial fisheries that operate in some areas, actually selling bass that are caught. And particularly in urban and rural areas where there's food insecurity or that are low income, we see people leaning on bass as a source of food, so supporting food security. Of course, they are indeed the most popular sports fish. Denny Brower on the Wheaties box, alongside people like Wayne Gretzky and I can't name any other sports figures. I never ate Wheaties. We, of course, have the Johnny Morris dynasty. We have tournaments in various formats. Of course, I'm showing the BAS, the BAS sort of stadium-style way in here, but of course, we also have the MLF streamed live to your TV or smartphone. And then, of course, there's the aquaculture side of things. There's not going to be a whole lot of talk about aquaculture this week, but realize that it is massive. If you go and search for the word largemouth bass in Google Scholar and limit it to the last 2 or 3 years, the bulk of the papers are on aquaculture, and the bulk of those papers are coming from China. So they're producing around 800,000 tons a year, which is a massive amount. So clearly an important fish for again, supporting nutrition in certain parts of the world. So the implications, so I present a maximum, and I'm going to present the implications. So first implication here is that we're in a good place. We've got something to sell here, right? The idea that bass matter, and that's something that we should easily be able to convince politicians of, and use that for our benefit to make sure that we do have bass populations that are managed for today and the future. What we need to do is better quantify that value. We're pretty good at putting a price on it, but it's not just the dollar value that matters. You know, what kind of nutritional benefit comes from bass? What about the cultural values that are experienced by indigenous communities and so on? And then finally, we need to acknowledge that good black bass management doesn't just benefit bass, it really benefits people. So when we invest money in evidence-informed bass management and good bass management, that really is supporting people, it's supporting communities, our economy, society, and so on. All right, the next maxim, and again, I think this is one that everybody's going to buy into, that habitat is the foundation for healthy and productive black bass populations and fisheries. If we don't have good habitat, we've got nothing. And so taking time to ensure that we protect and manage that habitat appropriately is key. Obviously here I'm talking about the physical, chemical, and biotic elements. It's all of those things. Obviously fish cannot grow, thrive, survive, reproduce without adequate habitat. And that's both in terms of the quality of that habitat and quantity for a given population or system. Of course, bass live in reservoirs and streams and all sorts of different systems, and each one of those has, and each species has different habitat needs, and obviously we need to match those things. Not all habitat is equal either. Some habitat certainly will attract a bass, and we can go and catch bass off it, but it's not necessarily helping them achieve anything meaningful. So we need to really think about the habitat needs of bass in that context. And of course, we're dealing with the fact that habitat is being lost, habitat is being degraded all around us. We have agricultural development, we have urbanization, and we are all we are all eating, we are all living in houses, we are all contributing. Every drop of water, if it doesn't evaporate again immediately like it would here, but is going to go downstream, and all of that water ends up in the systems where bass live and bass reproduce. So habitat extends well beyond the physical system where the fish live. The implications, well, we need to create, restore, enhance, and protect the habitat. For those that don't know, we happen to be in the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. Admittedly, there's not a whole lot that's happened under this moniker, but I think it's a good reminder for all of us that restoration matters. We've done a good job at damaging the planet, and now is a good time to focus on the repair. We also need to think about what type of habitat is needed, and this is going to vary from system to system. So, for example, the work that Greg Sass and team have been doing up in the Midwest, in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has clearly shown that woody debris is super important. Those are naturally reproducing systems, relatively little stocking, and their wood is important. So using habitat enhancement involves wood makes good sense. There are other places where there's more ponds or reservoirs that might naturally be depauperate of some of the physical habitat, and so plastic structures might make more sense. So all of these things need to be considered. What type of habitat is needed? Is it about overwinter survival? Is it about better spawning habitat? And making sure that we're targeting that, which is one of the things that Steve mentioned in the previous presentation. And then finally, we need to think about addressing the limiting factors or root cause. And again, this is getting away from the water and going up into those upland areas. So whether it's improving septic systems, whether it's planting trees, whether it's keeping cows out of creeks, these are not exciting things for bass anglers to do, but they're very, very important, and in fact may do more good than putting in more physical habitat in systems. So this also benefits not just bass, the system as a whole. It improves water quality, which is good for swimming, good for property values, sort of goes on and on. So we need to think beyond just the water body. The next one, and you can see this is a bit of a two-parter, and I've kind of put the second part in the background. Black bass are sometimes good for biodiversity, so we'll go to the second part here in a moment. So they're certainly top predators in a lot of systems. They play important roles in structuring those systems. Did you know that largemouth bass are the obligate freshwater glacidial host for over 80 species of freshwater mussel? In fact, they are the obligate host for more species than any other freshwater fish on the planet. To be clear, that doesn't mean we should therefore stock largemouth bass everywhere. In other places, they eat the obligate species that those freshwater mollusks need. So again, it can be a trade-off. The implications, we need to embrace black bass diversity and conservation as management objectives. That work is ongoing, and I want to give a shout out to the folks that organized the Black Bass Diversity Symposium, which was about a decade ago or so. And I think it was really important, and I think it buttresses nicely the kind of work that was done in the early black bass books, which was really about more the recreational dimension, and I think really starting to bring in thinking about black bass as also being important components of biodiversity. And then, of course, trying to better understand the role of black bass in ecosystems. The second half of that is that bass are not always good for biodiversity. So there are certain places where they've been introduced, they are invasive alien species, and there have been many documented negative impacts. They are one of the 100 worst invasive alien species according to the IUCN. You can go fishing for largemouth bass in Korea and Japan and Portugal and South Africa. I don't know about you, but when I go to other places, I like to fish for something different. So I think we need to do a better job of thinking about respecting local biodiversity and really celebrating that. Implications, where we deem bass to be problematic, we do need to have effective control mechanisms, and we're frankly not very good at that either, aside from nuking a system entirely with a rotenone, but unfortunately that wipes out everything else and you're back to square one. So oftentimes that doesn't square with biodiversity goals. Parks Canada, as you can see here, has been using spear fishing as an approach to try and reduce bass populations in a lake where they're deemed to be undesirable and so on. And I think we need to stop celebrating the fact that you can catch bass around the globe. I think we should celebrate that you can catch bass in Texas and Florida and Ontario and Minnesota and so on, but less so trying to do that in other locales. This is one that some fisheries managers might I don't know, squirm a little bit, but Dave's already introduced this idea. The black bass management toolbox is antiquated, so I believe that to be a maximum truth. And it's no one's fault, okay? It's systemic, and I think this frankly extends across most environmental management, so not just fisheries, wildlife management, environmental management in general. There's all sorts of reasons for it. Social science work has revealed that tradition, what's comfortable, what you've always done, is what individuals go back to. And that's reinforced by your workmates because they work in the same place and have come through the same system, and you're embedded in the same organization. And there's all sorts of institutional inertia that keeps things the same, okay? So that is the truth. That's how things work, and so change is difficult. That means we're not embracing the totality of evidence. As new information comes forward, as paradigms change, we tend to just stick with what we know. We also, the scientists, aren't doing the kind of science that really helps you move forward. So a one-off on one given lake over 3 years, is that going to really lead to you changing statewide regulations? No. You need to see things done at a management scale through time across different regions to understand what works, what doesn't, in which different contexts before you would ever move forward with large-scale management changes. So we need to be doing more of that kind of work. The evidence base is disparate. It's not been synthesized in a meaningful way, and that leads us to being unclear about what works and what doesn't. We also are really not doing a good job of considering the evolutionary principles. So evolution sort of underpins how these natural populations work. And there's things we know about bass already. We know that vulnerability to angling is a heritable trait. We know that anglers selectively remove certain genotypes and phenotypes. For example, the best dads when it comes to parental care. And there's also documented evidence of outbreeding depression that occurs with bass stocking. So all of those things have an evolutionary basis, and we need to make sure we're bringing evolutionary principles into our thinking about management. And that's salient to both the regulation side of things, harvest regs, but also stocking decisions. So implications here, we need to modernize that management toolbox, explore strategies, which may include effort control, something we haven't spent much time talking about. We focus on harvest controls as opposed to effort controls, and thinking more about technology. How can we harness technology such as angler apps, on smartphones, drones, eDNA, and other emerging forms of technoscience to help managers manage bass fisheries in more real time. We need those management scale experiments with replication over space and time. We certainly need to synthesize the evidence to look at what it all means and use that to guide us. So using well-established evidence synthesis principles that exist in the healthcare space, embrace evolutionary principles in our management, and really think about climate change as a game changer. How do we manage today so that we're already thinking about what these systems might look like in 15, 20, 30 years, and making sure their decisions today are sort of future-proofed in that context. We'll be talking about that a lot more in the next few days. Maxim 5, black bass recreational fisheries require 2 licenses. So, I'm not saying you need a Florida one and an Ontario one, but you need a recreational fishing license, right? That's just a given in most places. But the license I really want to talk about is the social license, okay? This is the idea that society writ large approves, supports, enables bass fishing. There are forces at play that would love to see fishing of all sorts removed, and bass fishing is, or curtailed, and bass fishing is certainly a bit of a target, being how prominent it is. Things that can happen. Here's an example of a tournament gone wrong in Canada, where a bunch of bass died. It wasn't reported. They were thrown in a dumpster. The tournament organizer was charged and forbidden from organizing tournaments in the future for good reason. But that didn't do anything good for bass, for the perception of bass fishing within the communities. We, of course, have different organizations that are anti-fishing, and you can see there, I don't know whether it looks like a smallmouth, largemouth hybrid on her cheek, but the idea that using imagery like this to evoke emotion in humans and try and get people to stop fishing. There have been some high-profile accidents of late involving bass boats and other vessels. And in the bottom right, there's a dude standing on the dock. I don't know if you can see it. In his left hand, he's got a gun. But emphasizing the level of conflict that can occur between bass anglers, people deemed to be encroaching on people's property, and the property owners. In this case, this individual was charged. That's not how you have a respectful conversation about fishing around somebody's dock. So the implications, we need to conduct research to better understand what's needed to maintain that social license. I don't think we should take it for granted. We need to recognize that individuals, all of us and all of those that engage with bass, play a role in maintaining that license. And we need to really endorse fishing celebrities. We heard about champions, that those folks that people will look up to, that will model the behavior that we want the average angler to follow with. And whether that's having tough discussions around things like flogging, that's a blurry photo of a bass boat going extremely fast, very close to shore, contributing to shoreline erosion, safety issues, and so on. We need people that are champions that model good behavior. And then finally, the last one is that black bass and bass fishing are for everyone. The motivations for bass fishing are really diverse. Everybody does it for different reasons. It could be for food, it could be for fun, wellness, competition, supporting livelihoods, and so on. But most of the fisheries management objectives around bass focus on the keeping anglers happy, catch and release, trophy bass. That's cool, but we need to realize there are other management objectives that come alongside those. It's not just one instead of all the others, that there can be multiple management objectives that are in fact aligned. There's lots of people that will never pick up a fishing rod, but really care about bass. That's certainly the case in my part of the world, where we have cottagers or summer house owners, swimmers, kayakers that all love the fact that there are bass in the lake, and they love the fact that there's a bass that nests off the end of their dock. But they will never fish for bass. They've never fished in life, and they don't want to. But they still value bass. Bass are important to them, which is pretty cool. When we think about the technology that we're dealing with today, a lot of it is unaffordable to the average angler. So what does that do in terms of giving advantage to those that have wealth versus not? We need to make sure we're still creating opportunities for people that can't afford a bass boat or can't afford forward-facing sonar to still fish, have access to that. And then, of course, women are poorly represented in the bass fishing community. And when I say for good reason here, it's just to be clear, what I mean is there's all sorts of reasons that really limit their ability to engage in a safe way, okay? Alyssa Goodenough was a master's student, and you can see the thesis title of her master's project in the bottom right corner. We haven't published that work yet, but what women in our community have to deal with it's really hard to fathom, and it's frankly gross. And we need to address that. It's a huge segment of our population that is essentially boxed out. There are exceptions, and of course, Penny Berryman sort of set the stage, but there are others as well. So implications, we need to think about fisheries management objectives that extend beyond keeping anglers happy. We need to create space for Indigenous communities and governments to have access to black bass, that's the cultural side of things, and a voice in crafting those management objectives. And then finally, we need to ensure that bass fishing is a safe and inclusive space for girls and women. And there's some people like Bree, who you can see in the bottom corner there, as the next generation of spokespeople for women and girls in bass fishing. So as I wrap up here, this is a quote I stole from a paper that Dave wrote this year, trying to encourage people to come here and trying to tell you why we were coming together. I really like this. There's urgent need to revisit black bass management with a collaborative goal, so bringing people together, we've done here, of identifying evidence-based actions, so what works and what doesn't, that balance conservation management, the word balance is important, and future-proof black bass management for the benefit of black bass and people. I think this really is the North Star in terms of why we are here. We've got a great foundation to build on. If you're wondering why I've got North American Journal of Fisheries Management up there, that's because that's where we're going to publish the papers that arise from this, so expect to hear more on that. And we'll end with one final maxim, and that's where we're going to have a bloody great meeting, okay? Our diverse experiences, knowledge, and perspectives that we all bring to the room are going to ensure that we have really spirited and productive discussions. And with that, I think we're going to be able to map out responsible and sustainable, what responsible and sustainable black bass fisheries and management look like for at least the next 25 years. And when I was doing my homework and reading about local success stories, here's one that hopefully we'll hear about this week, where Guadalupe bass were found in San Antonio's San Pedro Creek for the first time. And this is a system that's starting to go pretty extensive restoration. So just an example of one of those success stories, and there's many others we'll hear about this week, and I look forward to interacting with all of you. So thanks.
There's got to be a couple of questions out there.
Or maxims I missed.
Yeah. I love the idea of maxims. Yeah, that's interesting, because there are some maxims that exist that are less than maximal.
Yep. Yes,
Steve,
Jeff.
since we're here to be provocative and challenge our thinking, the other Steve talked about the angler's perception about stocking as being the tool. You spoke about an antiquated toolbox. How do you react to those two colliding ideas?
Yeah. First of all, black bass are managed differently across their sort of latitudinal gradient because of differences in production, system productivity, and so on. So it's again one of those things where it's difficult to paint everything with a brush. You know, isolated ponds can be managed very differently than public water bodies, for example. Yeah, stocking is it's an interesting one. If fisheries managers were able to manage fisheries optimally, stocking might not be needed, right? You know, like that's, you know, back in the day, that was always sort of the goal, that, you know, is that we have self-sustainable, reproducing populations, and then we manage effort and harvest so that the population can sustain itself. That's what we do in most marine systems, or the goal, of course. There's relatively little stocking in marine systems, so we have to rely heavily on those other forms of management. So, yeah, it's a really interesting one, and certainly there's lots of examples of negative ecological impacts, but positive socioeconomic impacts that have arisen from stocking. The challenge is mapping those out in the long term. So in 50 years, you know, do we have deleterious alleles that have, you know, sort of worked their way in that make those fish less able to withstand climate change? You know, you want a diversity of genotypes and phenotypes in your population as we throw different stressors at them. And of course, when we stock, we change that natural complement.
I was wondering if Steve maybe had another thought as well.
Yeah, I can do that, because I was just thinking, if we are changing the genetics of our bass through taking out the most fit dads, would stocking not more individuals that are fit dads replace those fish that we're taking out? Is there traits that we could use in our hatchery system to address the implications of fishing?
Yeah,
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was through efforts in hatcheries to manage the genetics, could you address some of those other issues like fisheries-induced evolution? And the answer is, that's to some extent, but you're always battling Mother Nature, and evolution, natural selection happens in the wild. And I think, again, it's very different if you're working in a system where it's entirely natural and self-sustained versus one where there's been so many changes already that you've kind of, you're working with what you've got. So. Genetics are scary and fantastic all at the same time, and we're starting to see efforts to manipulate fish in ways for the benefit of people. We just need to make sure that we're also thinking about biodiversity and biodiversity's sake, and thinking long term and bringing those evolutionary principles in.
I would also add a layer to that. Hi, Casey Locklear, co-founder of Black Bass Stewardship Group. So I would add an additional layer. So part of what we're actually attempting to do here is to survey the angler population. So remember, we're thinking about the lens of the people who are seeing our work. So what we actually have Steve and Steven saying is step one is saying, what is the perception? The perception from 94% of professional anglers, which are the megaphone of fishing to the general public, is that we have to stop bass. Stop, stop, stop. So what we're hearing from both of these gentlemen is that our onus is to shift the conversation. And we do that by putting science in action to start helping change that sentiment. The goal is not to still have 94% of anglers saying, stop bass, stop bass, stop bass.
Exactly.
The goal is to empower 94% of anglers, podcasters, YouTubers, to come on with us as scientists and give them a shareholder position, give them a stake in the conversation, and help them understand that maybe the goal needs to shift. Maybe we have a new way of looking at this, a new way of analyzing the genetics. And I really think that's the beauty of our topic of conversation here today is, yeah, we can talk about stopping all day long, but our job is to empower and shift that conversation. Because we know as subject matter experts, our voice is not going to resonate any longer. So our job is to get those voices who will resonate.
Thank you.
Thanks.